I am taller in person than on the internet. 47 years ago, I graduated from college. And on my very first day as a teacher, I walked into the classroom believing that I was Michelle Pfeiffer in Dangerous Minds. And that the Coolio soundtrack was about to start playing in the background. And I very naively asked everyone in the room, hey, would you mind finding a seat? We're gonna get started. Like, too much enthusiasm, no authority. And most of the kids just were kind of like, sure, and sat down. But not one boy in the back of the room who insisted on leaning against the chalkboard with his arms folded. And I so nicely went over to him and was like, hey, would you mind finding a seat? We're gonna get started. And my mom will probably watch this later, so I won't repeat exactly what he said. But it was basically like, I'm not going to sit down, you ugly, pick the worst insult you can think of. And I remember in that moment being like, ugly? How dare you? I have on my purple velvet maxi skirt and my blazer. Do not try to tell me this is ugly. That boy was later shot, not by me. He also did not die. He spent several months out of school rehabbing both the bones in his lower leg. And when I got a notice from attendance several months later saying, he's returning, I was like, but why? Why is he returning to my class? I was, of course, very trepidatious to have him come back to my room, and he approached me before school started, pulled me aside, and was like, I just want to let you know that I don't think you're ugly. And I was like, well, that is a very big relief. I have been lying awake, wondering if a 16-year-old boy in the hospital thought I was ugly that one time. And he spent the rest of the semester policing the classroom on my behalf. And has anybody ever been a teacher? Like a high school teacher or an elementary school teacher? A whole bunch of you. You know that the best scenario is when the children police themselves, right? The children policing themselves is far more effective than you policing them. So he would spend the rest of the class period and he would lift his finger and say, psst, at a student who was misbehaving, and they would immediately snap to attention. Why? Because he had been shot and he knew people. And so they were going to listen. So I wrote this book, The Small and the Mighty, as much for him and my former students as for the interview I just did on Friday, which was with a presidential historian at the estate of James Madison. I wanted the book to be accessible to students who were very disengaged from learning about history. And I wanted presidential historians with PhDs to be able to say, I gave this book to my mom because the scholarship is good. And it is difficult to find works that meet both of those bars, that are both entertaining, that are written in a way that draws you in, that makes you want to continue turning the pages to find out what happens, but that also has almost 500 footnotes in the back of the book, right? Books tend to either be real heavy on the scholarship and it's 1,200 pages long and you fall asleep by the end of the page, or it tends to be chicken soup for the soul in which we're all supposed to say Murica to the screaming eagles. Right? You know what I'm saying? It's one of those two things. And the truth is neither one of those things. The truth is not America is the worst country that has ever existed. Neither is the truth America is the savior of the universe, right? Like neither of those things are actually true. And I think students today are tired of being lied to. They're tired of being lied to that those are their only choices, that either they have to think America is the greatest thing that has ever existed, or they have to hate it with every fiber of their being. And let me tell you why I think this is a dangerous way of thinking, and I think is perhaps a dangerous trend among incoming freshmen. It's a dangerous trend to think that nothing you do will make a difference. That what I say and do and believe and who I become does not matter. That perhaps is more dangerous than a variety of very pressing issues that we are facing today. And this book is full of 12 unsung Americans who changed the course of history, not because of their family name, like Roosevelt, not because they had vast personal fortunes with their names on the side of a building, not because they held high elected office and could command the biggest armies, but because they kept doing the next needed thing. And so often, the people who had some of the biggest impacts on history were just the people who kept going one more day. They were people like Septima Clark, who I profile in this book. Septima Clark did not have a set of life circumstances that any of you would envy. She gets married, she has a baby, and the baby dies. She has another baby, and after that baby is born, she realizes that her husband has a secret second life, and that he is married to another woman and has children with the other woman. And then he dies, leaving her perhaps the worst thing somebody could be at the turn of the 20th century, a single mom. Being a single mom is still dang hard today. But imagine being a single mom when there was a tremendous amount of stigma attached to it, when there were no social safety nets that could help make sure that your children had what you needed. And Septima becomes a teacher, and she is an African-American woman who is not even permitted to teach in Charleston public schools, no matter the race of the children she was teaching. And so she teaches on a barrier island off the coast of South Carolina. And when she gets to her school building on the first day, she sees that the windows do not have any glass in them, and that their only choices were to either be inundated with the bugs or to close the shutters and to learn in the dark. And above the door of that school was the name Promise Land School. And I can promise you that none of you would go there today and think, this is really the promised land. But Septima Clark knew. She knew then something that is true still today, that education is liberation. Right? Education is liberation. The people in this room know that better than anyone. And Septima just kept putting one foot in front of the other. She eventually gets to be on the Charleston City School Board. And those are some of the best, that's some of the best revenge, right? Like, I get to be the decision maker later on. Throughout her life, though, she acquired quite a large number of enemies. People who opposed her work in the civil rights movement. I'm not talking about Chad in your office who microwaves fish, okay? That's a pretend enemy. If you microwave fish at work, stop immediately, okay? Nobody likes you. They're too afraid to say it. Stop bringing leftover salmon. That's not a work food. That's not a work food. So we're not talking about that guy. We're talking about people who actually tried to firebomb her house. People who actually wanted not just for her to shut up and sit down, but for her to be dead. And at the end of her long life, people ask Septima Clark, what have you learned? One of the things she learned was that had she not experienced this long life of adversity, she would not have gotten fired from her job. And had she not been fired from her job, that would never have allowed her to teach somebody named Rosa Parks. Right? She was able to look back at the breadcrumbs of her life and see how they led her to this moment. And at the end of her life, Septima Clark says, I have learned that I can work with my enemies. And that is a message that I would like to see on a billboard in Washington, D.C. right now. Right? I can work with my enemies. And she had real enemies. And her perspective was, I can work with my enemies because I know from experience that they might have a change of heart at any moment. At any moment. And how are our enemies supposed to have a change of heart, by the way, if we refuse to work with them? If we delete, block, unfriend, ghost, etc., everybody with whom we disagree. Had that been Septima's position, we would not have a Montgomery bus boycott. We would not have dozens and dozens of Supreme Court cases that lead to legal equality in the United States. I can work with my enemies, not because my enemies are right, not because I agree with what they're saying, not because their ideas are even good, but because I know that they might have a change of heart at any moment. And that's just one example of the 12 people that I profile in this book, all of whom have very compelling stories. I wrote this from the perspective of a teacher. I want you to have things to be able to talk about with your students. I want there to be rich discussion at the end of each section. I don't want people to be like, I don't know, I gave up, it was too boring. Maybe you're familiar with that phenomenon. I want you to know, and the students who read this to know, an important thing, that hope is not a feeling that we experience. And if we are waiting to experience the feeling of hope, we are probably going to keep on waiting. That hope is a choice. Hope is a choice the people who came before us made despite evidence to the contrary. And that choice to have hope that who you are matters, that what you are doing matters, that who you become matters, that choice is something that is available to every single one of us, no matter our background, no matter how much money our parents have or how single our mom is. That's available to each one of us because we are the small and the mighty.